What happens to us after we die? It's a spooky subject. Guys, that has been a question for thousands of years for many people. And to be honest, Jehovah's Witnesses have been trying to answer that question with quite specifics. And I'm going to talk about this subject because even though many people leave Jehovah's Witnesses, there is still instilled in their subconscious mind fear, a fear of Armageddon, fear of what happens to us, just in case they are correct. What happens to us if there is something beyond? Some people start believing in hell. Some people believe that there may be some sort of state of mind where we are being punished or tortured. And although hell was never a doctrine for Jehovah's Witnesses, however, there are certain fears that people still have as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or acquired new ones. And that area needs to be clarified. So let's find out what Jehovah's Witnesses really teach about death. Well, they think that there are two hopes. One hope is for resurrection on this planet here on earth, and you're going to be living in paradise conditions, just like God intended at the very beginning when he created a Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve. Now, of course, they not entirely know what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. They think Jesus will come, kill a whole bunch of people, leave Jehovah's Witnesses, and maybe somebody else that they don't know about, and that these people will live for 1,000 years, teaching those who will be resurrected until the whole earth will be turned into paradise within a 1,000-year period of time. Now, that's not it. That's part of the story. That's the story they tell you most of the time. There is another part of the story which they believe very selective amount of people will go to heaven. And they have a number, 144,000. That number is taken from the book of Revelation. And they think, okay, this is a little number, although everything in the book of Revelation is symbolic. They really strongly believe that 12,000 from this tribe of Israel, and 12,000 from this tribe of Israel, and 12,000 of this tribe of Israel, and 12 of those tribes, and all of those things are symbolic, and the 12,000 is symbolic, and the tribes are symbolic, but the 144,000, that must be real. And they think that number is accurate, and these people will go to heaven. Now, if you do an actual math of how many people lived for all those last 2,000 years, and you'll see that they really quickly will run out of the numbers. There is suspicion that close to 1 million Christians were by the end of, I think, second century or something like that. So the number 144,000 is extremely small. But anyways, they think that these people will go to heaven. And when are they resurrected and how are they resurrected? That is still a question. And they're still very much unknown because they don't believe in a soul. They don't believe that somebody has a soul inside that travels into the space somewhere. They think that they will be given a spiritual body. What that means, I have no idea, but somehow a spiritual body will be given to them. And just like Jesus was resurrected and later on could appear over here and disappear and walk through walls and, do a whole bunch of things that normal person can't, they're thinking that's something like that, right? So problem is with their understanding of what are the dead, what state are the dead right now. Because in the Bible, it was very clearly stated that you're not allowed to contact the dead. In the Old Testament, people were going to a place called Sheol, and that's just a place for the dead that they didn't really know what it is. They believed that that's where people are going after they die, and that's it. There was no such thing as hope for paradise. There was no division between people going to heaven or being with God. No, just you're going to Sheol and that's it. It wasn't a place of torture either. If you read the book of Job, you know that Job was suffering very much and he was hoping to die. He was hoping to go to Sheol because that would be a place of rest. It wouldn't be a place of torture. So the idea of torture came out much, much later. But Jehovah's Witnesses knew very well that in the Old Testament, you were not allowed to contact the dead. So when Saul contacts a prophet, right? Prophet Elijah, and he goes to a medium, and he's going to a he was about to go to war, and he wanted to know the outcome of that war. So he wanted to find out from the prophet what will be the outcome. So he goes to a spiritual medium, and the medium somehow calls for Elijah. Elijah shows up. It doesn't say in the Bible that it was a demon pretending to be Elijah. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses interpret that account as. But he actually says, yeah, Elijah shows up and talks to Saul. Now, you might think, oh no, that this was Satan, right, or some sort of demon pretending. Well, if that's the case, then when Jesus went on a little mountain and he talked to Elijah and Moses, what was that? Was that also Satan pretending to be Elijah? Was that also a demon pretending to be Moses? So Jehovah's Witnesses are saying, well, that there was a vision, some sort of vision, right? Well, I don't know what kind of a vision it was, because Peter was so convinced that those things are real that he wanted to build a tent for them, and so he could sleep to Elijah and Moses in those tents. It's kind of interesting. So it's a lot of unknown in that aspect, and every religion is trying to convince themselves that they have the answers. Truthfully, whatever it is that you believe in, you're going to pick the scriptures to match whatever it is that you believe. Nobody talked more about hell than Jesus. He came up with this parable of Lazarus and a rich person, and after they died, one end up in heaven with Abraham and the other one end up in hell being tortured. So he used those illustrations to show, kind of what happens after we die, and people started creating the idea of heaven and hell. But Jehovah's Witnesses very much know that, very much they teach that those are not real places. Yes, they believe that you can go to heaven, but they don't believe that you can go to hell and being tortured. Their understanding of who God is and what are God's values contradict the idea of hell. So basically, it was one of the Russell's first objection was, well, I can't reconcile a loving God, a God who is full of mercy and kindness and forgiveness. I can't believe God could possibly create such a place where he would torture people forever. And what would be the purpose of torturing them? It's just forever and ever and ever. You can just imagine somebody lived, I don't care how long, 40, 50, 60, 80 years on this planet. And then 1,000 years later, that person is still being tortured and tortured. But it just didn't match their belief system, so they got rid of it. However, majority of Christianity still believes in hell, and Islam still believes in hell. But there is something about witnesses that they believe that most of the time they don't talk about it. So they think that those who were out of 144,000, they were already resurrected. The resurrection already took place sometimes around 1914 when Jesus sat on the throne, because that's one of their doctrines, and they went to heaven and they're sitting on their thrones already. Now, they also believe, I can't find it right now, but it's in this book, the Revelation book, where they actually say that these who are in heaven with Jesus, they are helping with the organization here on earth. They're helping and they're influencing somehow the governing body, helping to make decisions and keeping the organization the way it is. That's pretty much contacting the dead, or the dead contacting you somehow, or influencing you. I don't know how you could reconcile this, but the weird part about the whole thing is that those who are planning to go to heaven, those who have that kind of a hope, they're thinking they will join Jesus during the Armageddon. They think they will come back here and slaughter majority of the people. So imagine the ones who are at the very top in the governing body, they actually believe that they could go door to door and say, join my religion under my headship, or I will come back and kill you. Because that is the theology. That's what they believe. Of course, they don't say it like that. They would never say it like that. But that's what they actually believe, which is kind of crazy when you ask me. But let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's find out why people believe that something is happening after we die, and how are those beliefs being shaped. If you study a little bit of history of cultures and history of religion and history of God, and how different gods were created in different parts of the world, how different gods were imagined, viewed, worshipped, depending on basically four things. So, number one was where you were born. Depending on where you were born, your idea of who God is, who you should worship, what was happening after we die, all those things were answered based on where you lived. If you lived in India, your idea would be totally different than if you live in Brazil, or if you live in Africa, or if you live in Kazakhstan. If you lived at a different time period, it would also be shaped by when you lived. If you lived in Canada, but if you lived in Canada 1,000 years ago, people 1,000 years ago had a totally different view of who God is and what happens to us after we die than they have majority, at least right now. So where and when you lived shaped your beliefs. And you might think, oh, you know the answers right now much better than these people before or somewhere else. But truthfully, 1,000 years from now, people will be studying what you believe today, and they'll be rolling their eyes thinking, how the heck these people believe that? That's basically what we think about the gods, the religions, and the faiths of people from 1,000 years ago. And next one, the third, is what do you need? Based on what you need, the God was shaped, the God was imagined, the God was created by humans. So if people needed to, let's say, work with their agriculture, they would create God that would give them rain, that would have rituals to make sure that God is appeased with their dancing or with their singing or their sacrifices. And when the sacrifice were given, then the rain would come, and they would create, let's say, Thor, that would give them rain, and he would be upset with them, so he would throw a bolt of lightning and burn their crops. So whatever they needed the most, the god would be created. Maybe you remember that scene from the movie Gladiator when they go to Rome, and right in front of Colosseum there is a god, and the owner of slaves, the owner of gladiators, comes up to that god and he kisses his feet, because that was a god of prosperity, and he wanted that god to give him prosperity because that's what he was after. That was on his mind, to give, to make sure that he's rich. So he would praise God of prosperity. Now there were obviously many, many different gods who would be responsible, let's say, for water, right? They would create Neptune or Poseidon, depending on where you lived. But he was a god of water, so that god would give them fish, or you would be upset with them, and he would send huge waves, or flood them, or flip the boats upside down. So of course the same thing, they would have to create sacrifices and make sure that the god is appeased. So wherever you lived, whatever is that you needed, people would create god and imagine what the god would do for them. If you go to India, you'll see people traded all the time from one country to another, from one district to another district. So they created many, 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 many gods who don't really interfere with our life, but they're good for something. They're good for trading. They talk to each other, right? They can, this guy have these senses, and this one's got these vegetables, that one's got that goat and whatever, and we can exchange things. And they worship different gods. They still making those gods until today, and there's many, many, many of those gods all the time, answering questions that they need the answers to be, they need the questions to be answered. So then there's a fourth leg. A fourth leg is what we don't understand. What we don't understand, whatever is mystical, whatever is that we don't understand logically, whatever we cannot explain with science, we inserted supernatural force in there. So if people didn't understand where lightning comes from, then they would create a god named Thor, and he would have a hammer, and lightning would come from his eyes, and that would be an explanation of why we have lightning and thunder. But the more science progressed, the less we needed those gods, the more of those stories were turned into myths and legends. But there are still things that we don't understand. There are still things we don't have exact answer to, and maybe we will never have that. Maybe we'll never know how life started here. Maybe we'll never have that answer. So people insert God, saying, "Oh, this is a creator who made things the way they are." Or some people create aliens. They say maybe life came from another planet. It's it is actually possible that that could take place. There are some scientific evidence that could back that up, but of course we don't have a proof of this. But people basically created what we call God of the gaps. Every time there is a gap in scientific knowledge, we create supernatural source as a cause of that. So if you don't know where the universe started, how everything that we see began, we create a supernatural source saying there was a creator who started the whole thing. Now, of course, there's many unknown even with this theory, because if in the beginning there was nothing but God, then where did the universe come from? Did he take piece of his leg and started making universe out of his leg? I'm being, you know, foolish here, but there's a lot of unknown, right? There's if there is such a thing as God, then there's always that question: where did he come from? If in the beginning there was God, then where did he come from, right? Who created the creator? That answer, that question will always be there for anybody who is a believer. So people use those four things. Their belief about the supernatural was always based on when they lived, the time period, where they lived geographically, what is it that they needed, and what is it they didn't understand, and use God to say, God did this, and therefore I don't have to think about it anymore. In my opinion, that is very damaging. It's very damaging because the moment you accept that as true, as real, research stops. Your understanding of reality stops. See, when people believe that we are getting sick because of sin, then there was no need to help sick people. Why would you help somebody who's sick if he's being punished by God for the sin that he committed? It's like seeing somebody who was imprisoned for some sort of for stealing, and then you go and break them out of prison. No, no, no. He should be in prison. He committed a crime. And same thing was here. People believe that, oh, God punishes you with these diseases because you have sinned. Therefore, it's justifiable that you're suffering, and I'm not here to help you. So that kind of thinking stopped people from progress. And it's even in the Bible when people approach Jesus and said, "Who sinned? This guy was born blind. Like, who sinned, him or his parents?" They didn't know, because those were the common beliefs back then. It was very common to see people who were not who had mental health issues, and they would say what, that the person has a demon. If he had epilepsy, and normal person talks to you, all of a sudden he falls down on the ground and shaking like crazy, he's possessed by demons. So what they would do is they would call a priest. The priest would come, holy water, cross on his forehead, and then the person stop shaking, and voila, exorcism. So they saw this and they believed this, that it was real. It was real to them. Only people who started questioning the real cause of those events, when they said, maybe there was something more. How is it that this person stopped shaking even though priest didn't come? We didn't pray and he seems fine now. What's going on, right? So people started questioning things, and because they started questioning, they started looking for better answers, and eventually they found the real answers. But if you are locked in this idea of God did this, then you stop thinking. Your progress of finding out the real answers will stop. So when we look at what happens to us after we die, from a scientific point of view, we know exactly what happens to us when we die. You stop breathing, your body starts decomposing pretty much right away. Your temperature goes down and you will become as the temperature in the room. So we know from scientific point of view exactly what is taking place, but there is a couple of events that took place and people started questioning, is this really so? And I'm talking about NDEs. when there's a near death experience and people come back after they've been clinically dead for, let's say, a minute or five. I heard of people 45 minutes dead. And they come back and they tell stories. They say, oh, I saw a light, I saw people, I felt loved. This place was amazing, wonderful. It looks similar to our planet, but it's full of love and the feeling I cannot describe. It's something that does not exist on this planet. And I saw this tunnel, right? And I was going towards the tunnel, and somebody came and told me it's not your time, and they pushed me back, and here I am. And this kind of situation happened more than once, to the point where science actually started doing experiments. They wanted to know if there was something to it, because when somebody makes a claim, that doesn't mean it's true. But what does confirm that something is true is testing. So if we test it over and over and over again and we're getting the same results, then the hypothesis is getting confirmed. So what they did was they put some objects above a operating room, because that's where most people die, right? An operating room. They put some objects and letters on top of somebody's head, and of course facing downwards, so they couldn't read it. If they opened up their eyes, they couldn't see what's up there. They could only see it if they were actually flying up to the ceiling. And they were hoping that if this is real, if somebody was actually had this out of body experience, as many people claim that they could see or hear what was happening in the operating room and describe what was taking place, they were hoping that this person would come back and say, yes, there was something above my head, and this is what was written, and those are the objects that were sitting there, and I saw it. I was able to see and recognize the objects. Well, no matter how many tests they have done in many places all over the world, as a matter of fact, they came up with zero results. Zero. Not one person who, of course, it's not an easy thing to do to find a person who had that experience, but those who did, they were unable to say, oh, you know what? Yeah, I saw something. Majority of the people, of course, didn't see anything. They just blacked out and they don't remember anything that took place. So we couldn't back that up. But there were certain interesting stories of people who claim that they not only remember when they were 1 years old or babies, but they remember their past life. They remember before they were born things that took place. Can we take those things seriously? Well, here is what I found interesting. You can close your eyes, but you can't really close your ears. Your brain always hears sounds, and your subconscious mind always register what's around you. Now, majority of this stuff is forgotten, but it is being programmed. So what is, in my opinion, a lot more rational explanation to this is when we, let's say, are in a crowd, and in this crowd, we're in our mind, we're thinking about what's tomorrow, blah 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 blah, and what we hear is a whole bunch of people talking, and it's all gibberish. We don't pay attention to anything, and all of a sudden, some at the end of the bus or whatever it is, somewhere far from the crowd, we hear, and the Jehovah said in this scripture that we should be obedient, and you're like, whoa, and all of a sudden you picked on that conversation. Right? There is something in our brain called RAS, reticular activating system, when we pay attention to things that matter to us. And that gets activated, and all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, we're paying attention to it. But your subconscious mind heard everything. Your subconscious mind heard every conversation that was around you. It just wasn't significant enough for you to pay attention to it. But stuff stays there. You could fall asleep in front of a TV. The TV is still going, and your ears are listening, and your subconscious mind gets programmed. Is it possible that somebody heard somebody else's story, heard a story on TV or from similar circumstances, or maybe when he was a baby, and that information was programmed into their subconscious mind? Now they're thinking those are memories of my past life, because I was a big warrior. See, nobody thinks, oh, I was a Hitler before. But everybody thinks they were a big hero Why? Because when we're watching TV, there is that big hero that we actually connect with. And if that person ever watched a movie or fell asleep in front of a TV and heard a story of a big hero, maybe, I'm not saying that's what it is, but maybe it's possible that person's subconscious mind registered that story, and now they're thinking, oh yeah, must be my past life experience. So a lot of things that might seem odd and weird and unexplainable, the moment we find the explanation, it's automatically starting to shape in our heads like, oh yeah, that makes more sense. And be very careful of swallowing some stories and believing some stories that seem so improbable at the beginning, and then later on when you find the real explanation, then it's like, oh yeah, okay, then it wasn't it. And we're all biased, we all have our biases. So do I. When I was a witness, I believed in the demons and angels and some supernatural sources. So when I was working in this house and I was running electrical wires, I I left. I'm in the bedroom, and I hear a jacuzzi in the washroom turning on by itself. I wired that thing. I know it cannot turn on by itself, but it did. I run into the bathroom and I'm trying to shut it off, and nothing's working. Nothing. I press all the button on, off. Nothing's working. I run into the basement. I'm trying to turn off the breaker. About 2 inches before I touch the breaker, boom, the jacuzzi turned off by itself on its own. I'm like, something's weird happening in this house. Later on, I keep on working. My heart is already beating a little faster, and the alarm goes off by itself. It wasn't even armed. I'm like, what the hell? I run into the panel. I don't know the code. It's not my house. But I see a button clear. So I'm about to press it, and about 2 inches before I pressed it, it shut off on its own by itself. At that moment, I'm freaking out. There's got to be a demon in this house, for crying out loud. How is it that things turn on and off by itself? You heard those stories? You heard those stories of, oh, the light turned on by itself. There was nobody there. It started flickering. The light started flickering right around the time when my grandpa died. See, those stories, they get over exaggerated. They get told from one person to another, and people believe it. People believe it's real. It becomes real to them. But what happens when you actually find a logical explanation to it? So in my case, I wanted to talk to the owner. I'm like, this is what took place, right? And I don't know how to interpret this, but I'm freaking out. And he started laughing at me. He says, listen, if the jacuzzi turned on by itself, it means you must have washed your hands or something. I'm like, well, yeah, I washed my hands, but I didn't turn on the machine. He says, yeah, but there is a sensor that if it senses any water in the pipes, it turns on automatically for 2 minutes to dry up the water to make sure the calcium doesn't build up in the pipes. So it's a mechanism. You can't turn it off. It just goes on automatically. 2 minutes later, it shuts off automatically. I'm like, oh, I guess it was not a demon who turned on and off the jacuzzi. It was a simple sensor. Yeah, but what about the alarm? Right? Well, what happened is you cut a piece of wood, that dust cut the fire alarm cut the dust, and it sent a signal to the alarm in the house, because those two things are connected. And they called me, and because they called me, I told them, oh yeah, there was a construction worker working there, don't worry about it, shut it off. And the center of well, they were monitoring that house, they shut it off. So I'm like, oh, in that case, it makes sense. No need for a demon no more. But for as long as you don't know what it was the real cause of it, your mind goes wild. Your mind goes crazy. What the heck? You might think, oh, you know what? Yeah, but people had out of body experiences. They They could see themselves. They left their bodies. Okay. I actually had a very similar experience more than once. So what happens is in your brain, you have like, it's a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to simplify it. It's those two things that when you fall asleep, both your muscles and your mind, conscious mind, falls asleep. You don't have a control over it. Your subconscious mind takes over. When you wake up, those two things start working again. And you fall asleep and you wake up. You fall asleep and you wake up. But sometimes your mind is off, but your muscles wake up. And that's you start sleepwalking. People who sleepwalk, it's kind of weird. My sister was sleepwalking all the time. So we never knew whether she's awake or not. She just walks around the house and she's not awake. She just does weird things. Like she would grab a vacuum and pull out all the dirt out of the vacuum and spread it all over the floor. And we're like, what the heck is wrong with her? Right? But she was sleeping. She was sleepwalking. She would do really weird things. And the conversations with her completely incoherent. We couldn't understand the word she was saying, but she acted like she was awake. It was the weirdest thing ever. But she was sleepwalking a lot. But there is a moment in some people's lives when a mind wakes up, but the muscles don't. We call it sleep paralysis. So your mind wakes up, you think you're awake, but you can't move a muscle. Your muscles are not moving. You feel like you're paralyzed. And you're seeing the room around you. You're seeing yourself. And you can't move. And you feel like somebody's choking you because your muscles are not working right now. And you can't breathe. And you're like, oh, the demon is attacking me. And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. I had those experiences. And believe me, you wake up sweating like crazy and you're thinking you're being killed. And it's not fun. It's not fun. And I had those experiences, but I had those experiences when I was a Jehovah's Witness. So guess what? I believe it was Satan. It was demon attacking me. And I was praying, Jehovah, please help me. Jehovah, please. And then I can breathe again. Oh yeah, Jehovah help me. And it reinforced my belief that, yeah, it must have been a demon for sure. But then I learned about sleep paralysis and I'm like, oh yeah, this is real. And then I realized, oh, you know what? It's genetic. This is why my sister was sleepwalking. My other sister had sleep paralysis. I had sleep paralysis, and my daughter was sleepwalking when she was a kid, because it's part of their genes, right? It's inherit. You can inherit this. So once you have the real understanding of what's truly going on, and it's scientifically proven, and you know exactly what is happening. This whole idea, oh yeah, yes, Satan possessed my child because my child has night terror. If you ever experience or you saw a child having a night terror, you would believe in possession. You would think that the child has a demon. When I saw my kid having night terrors, sometimes for hours or end, screaming on top of the lungs, running around the house while still sleeping. In the morning, they would not remember a thing, but they're freaking out. They look like they're possessed. They look like they're, I don't know, demon went in there. And it's impossible to wake them up. You try to cuddle them, you try to splash water on them, you try to pinch them a little bit. Nothing works. It's impossible to wake them up. It's crazy. And if you don't understand what's happening, then you will think it's the child is possessed. As a matter of fact, we had a talk on Sunday when the guy said, oh yeah, there was a child who was possessed by a demon. And he was freaking out, running around the house, screaming and this. And we took the child, outside of the house, and the child calmed down. So we knew we have something in the house that maybe we purchased from Goodwill, some used clothing store or whatever. And now we have a demon in the house that possessed our child. It came from the platform. The guy was describing the situation. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is crazy. But many witnesses believe this. Many witnesses would never touch anything on a garage sale because they think there could be a demon attached to that item. Many people believe this. Many witnesses believe this. It's time to get rid of it. It's time to dive deep into science, into understanding, into what is really going on, and get rid of those fears, because they could control you. Fear is for one reason and one reason only: to keep you alive. But for many reasons, fear today is keeping people from living. And that is a big problem. It's time to get rid of those fears, study a little bit of what is really going on. And when you see something that you can't understand, you're like, man, I don't get it. I don't understand it. It means you're lacking knowledge. It means a piece of information that is missing. And be very careful about inserting supernatural source into something you don't understand. Maybe there's something you simply don't understand. And tomorrow, you're going to understand this. And this whole idea of, oh, there was a ghost somewhere will disappear. Even if you don't find the answer. I mean, you might never find the answer. You might die not knowing the answer. But at the same time, that doesn't automatically mean that it had to be a supernatural source. So that's what I wanted to stress out for you guys, because my mission in this channel is one, help people get rid of fear, help people to live without fear, because I believe that fear is stopping people from progress. Fear is stopping people from achieving their full potential and they living the life that they want to live. And for as long as they're afraid of questioning, they're afraid of doing the extra step. And many fears have been installed in people's minds, especially if you were a Jehovah's Witness or any religion, as a matter of fact. There's a lot of fears that people are like, oh, I don't know. Think about it. If you were not suffering, if you don't have any memories, if you did not feel anything prior to your birthday, then what are the chances you're going to feel something after you pass away? The consciousness. Some people say, well, but we don't know consciousness. Consciousness, it's something unexplainable by science. True, but think about it. The more the brain grows, the more it becomes aware of itself. When you were born, we don't really remember much. And as we're growing, we're becoming more aware, more self-conscious and self-aware. And at the same time, if you give somebody a drug, you can stimulate their brain and you know the effects of that. You see people who had strokes and you see the area of their brain that was affected by that stroke. And the doctors, before the person's in the coma, my mother-in-law was in a coma and she had stroke, and like 7 pieces of cloth blood was in her brain. And the doctor said, okay, because this part of brain is damaged, she will never be able to talk. And she never learned how to talk. Because of this is how it's going to affect her. He was able to tell us before she woke up what this woman will be capable of doing and what she will not. Certain parts of the brain, even though they're dead, another part of brain could learn that function, but it's obviously not ideal. But it is that there is some recovery, right? But they could actually see how brain damage can affect you, okay? Because they know which part of the brain is responsible for what functions. Now, if we have something outside of our mind, some sort of consciousness that it's not dependent on our brain functions, then I would really like to see some sort of evidence for it. I'm not saying there isn't, I'm saying I'm not convinced there is, because I have not seen any proof. If somebody makes that claim, great, let's test it out. Let's test it out. Let's prove that it's actually in existence. If there is no proof of existence of anything outside of what we can detect, then why do we believe it? Is it based on things that we don't understand, legends, authority figures, religion, time and place that we were born, or maybe we want to see something because it meets our needs? Thanks, guys, for watching. Hope to see you soon, and I'll see you in the next one.